Hello, and welcome back to Around the Block with GoodBlock. I am your host today, Erica, here with Douglas from GoodBlock team. And also this week, we get to talk with some Telos folks who are also affiliated with some other Antelope chains and hear about how their governance systems differ from Telos's and kind of discuss that a little bit. It's going to be a fun learning experience, and hopefully we spark some fun ideas. So let's bring on our guests this week. We're talking with EOS community member and Telos Foundation guardian Chris Barnes, as well as EOS and Telos block producer Michael from EOS USA. Hey guys.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Welcome back, Michael. And can't believe this is your first time here, Chris. Should have had you a bunch of times, but first of many, I hope. Great to see you guys. Thanks for doing this.
For sure.
Awesome. So let's get started kind of with the basics. We like to think of this as an educational podcast. So let's break down for some of our viewers, what is an Msig, and then why is this one in particular that we're discussing today important?
What is an Msig is, everybody may understand that their account, has a key. If you understand the basic blockchain of an account can do things if they have the key to do it. One of the added benefits that was developed into the technology was the ability to say, well, instead of just one key always having access to it, what if we said, okay, let's add a couple of keys and then even maybe give them specific weights and say, if there's 5 keys, only 3 of them need to approve it. And then that's what ultimately we propose a multi-signature proposal that says, these are the actions that we're trying to authorize. And what the Msig structure, permission structure triggers is, okay, here are the accounts or keys that are related to that. And then obviously once consensus of whatever configured weight is achieved, then the action can be executed as it was authorized by enough people. Does that make sense on the basic understanding of what an Msig is? Building off of that, the way a lot of the governance within the block producers works is, at least the EOSIO Antelope-based chains with standard consensus, ultimately, there's 21 active producers, give or take, that are, actively producing and validating the chain. And the way governance and changes and managing of the chain occurs is 15 of 21, which is the supermajority of the active producers that are voted in, would basically have that authoritative control over whatever of the chain. In certain scenarios, you've seen recovery processes, you see much more normal chain upgrades and contract, just revision and maintenance, as well as creations of new, fund structures, inflation management, all along those things. The way that occurs on most of these chains is related to the multi-sig structure, and ultimately the active block producers are what that 15 of 21 consensus is trying to be achieved.
And it's probably worth mentioning what the opposite of that consensus. It means that because you require 15 of 21 for the affirmative to make something happen, you only require 7 out of 21 to prevent action. That's an important piece. How do you stop something from happening? If you have bad actors, you need 15 bad actors to collude, but you only need 7 to make something not happen from the block producer's point of view.
Right.
That's an interesting point.
And operate. Each of the chains basically are set up to operate on their own, continue operating forever. It's really only changes that are required, right? We put in the software. If you just wanted to have it run by the software, the node operating software with the consensus rules, you would never change anything. But when we do updates, or if there are certain funds created or any of those types of things, that's when you need a little bit of surgery by the BPs. It's something that in Ethereum type smart contracts and things like that, you don't have in the same way. You in proof of work, you get the node operators basically vote by how many of them will adopt the new software, and usually 51% is all you need. So our way is a little bit special.
Well, and that does kind of lead me to my next question then. So most of our listeners are basically familiar with Telos and Telos's governance. Can you guys give us a quick few key differences between ours and EOS? Because when I first heard about this MSIG we're talking about today, I thought, well, who decides that? Is that the voters or the BPs? So let's do a little bit of a breakdown on a couple of key differences there between EOS governance and Telos governance.
There's a lot of similarities, first of all, right? So there's a ton of similarities between how the two chains work. Some of the biggest governance differences go back to these block producers themselves and the rules surrounding how they are selected. That, I think, is probably the most interesting and probably noteworthy aspect of the differences between Telos and EOS. And because of those block producers, as Michael mentioned, at 15 of 21, they are the backbone of any. They're the ones. That's the computers. Blockchains are nothing. It's software that runs on a computer, and if you don't have those block producers running these computers, it's irrelevant. There's nothing matters but for them. So the block producers themselves are the backbone of all of this. Everything that anyone's trying to build on a blockchain, you're absolutely requiring these vertebrate of BPs for everything to stem from. So how they are selected is so very, very important, yet seems to be so overlooked by many people in the blockchain space. Governance only matters until you get rug pulled, right? I mean, look at all the current examples. No one cares about governance until all of a sudden you lose all your funds because you had poor, ineffectual governance process.
Yeah, great point. Did anybody want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some similarities and some differences. And I mean, we were here at the launch. We weren't part of y'all's launch party just because we were still fighting our battles over on our other fronts. But I've been here all along and seen. So, kind of know some of the reasons why Telos even existed. I mean, that wasn't how the original plan in 2017 originally was started. But then in 18, by the way things shaped up and decisions and indecisions and all sorts of things along that line, a lot of focus was put, trying to put some structure around the agreements for the block producers and what they are expected to do, not expected to do, and even building in the framework of chain consensus between, more so than just the token holders voting. Now, on an interesting aspect, at the very core level, both select their top 21 based off of token weight vote for a block producer. So what's dictating and how those votes, Telos got rid of proxies and different things like that. There are some subtle differences about it, but the way DPoS and antelope-based chains and governance default works is that the token holders have a weight to vote for particular block producers that they want to support or not support, don't vote for them, is identical on both chains. It's just there's a lot more mechanics, and Telos focused a lot more lessons learned from the launching of EOS to try to provide a little bit more of a voice signaling of the community.
Yeah, second mouse gets the cheese. Yeah. So we had the benefit of seeing what was happening on EOS and concerns that some people had brought up really early, but it was unclear what was going to actually happen. Now, this is the way EOS works, and I'm not going to put any value judgment on it, but with EOS, there's no layer between the users and the BPs except for that voting, right? It's straight up voting. On Telos, we created a TBNOA, Telos Blockchain Network operating agreement, and some other governance documents that say what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, with the idea that this would give guidance to what was wanted and give reasons for those who violate those to no longer serve as block producers. So that's worked quite well for us. And one of the things that's very different is on Telos, we decided we don't want anybody buying votes, and we don't want any block producers colluding so that they're actually, like you see on Solana a lot, for example, where you see they claim to have, thousands of validator nodes, but there's no reason to believe that they aren't just owned by a small number of people, right? So on Telos, they have to all be independent. But on EOS, there not only are no protections against that, it's just there's no rules against that, and therefore people do it because they're not breaking rules. But some people don't necessarily think that's great governance, right? So there's just no guiding document. There were attempts early on. There was a constitution at the very beginning that Dan Larimer wrote and forced down everybody's throats, and there were some attempts to change that, and ultimately that was just thrown off, and EOS at the time decided that it would simply be the block producers, whatever they did, it was legal on the chain. So, and that's where it still stands.
And I think the other big thing to point out in terms of difference is exchanges, and the whether exchanges are allowed to participate in voting for block producers. It's prevented on Telos and permitted on EOS, and that I think will become relevant as we get into this conversation.
Exchanges can vote if it's their tokens, but they expressly cannot vote the tokens that that they are not the beneficial owners of.
Right.
So yeah, and that goes to others as well. But yeah, mostly is about exchanges, and yes, that is why you see so many exchanges in the top EOS block producer.
Sure, that makes sense for sure. So then let's kind of dive into the meat of our discussion today. So last week there was an MSIG executed by a majority vote of EOS BPs to send 68 million EOS tokens to EOS Network Ventures to support a new 100 million USD ecosystem fund to directly invest into EOS projects. So some community members believe they weren't given the appropriate prior knowledge or comment period to discuss the implications of this. So we wanted to kind of bring Michael and Chris here so we could give them both an opportunity to chat about it a little bit. So what are the details of this particular MSIG? And then we'll let you guys each provide your kind of views on it.
Framework before too many details. The 68 million were minted to not the ENV. A lot of initialisms will be thrown around here. So the ENV is the actual EOS Network Ventures. So this will be a GP. It's meant to be it's an actual fund. It will have partners, we assume, and it will have many LP or limited partners. And so these 68 million were moved to an account that will be an LP of the ENV. So it's actually not funding, it's moving to what will be a limited partner of the actual fund itself, just to clarify that to start off.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for clearing that up so we have our facts right here. So then these funds so they were minted specifically for this proposal, correct? They didn't come from anywhere.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, technically minting them kind of, like on all crypto internet magic money, they just kind of appear out of nowhere because, somebody clicked a few keys. But there was a representation of many moons ago, God, how many years ago was this, that some of the original idea of EOS had funding in their inflation to carve off and try to define like a worker proposal system. It was not working very well, similar to, or many of the reasons why Telos worker proposal system is dramatically different and has evolved over the years, as such. But ultimately, the block producers, in a decision to, instead of letting it accumulate and never having any structure or accountability, they decided to burn the accumulated assets. I think it may have been two of them, and then also turn off the inflation that was filling that bucket. And that is ultimately where the magic number of 68 million, give or take, whatever, kind of came from, as opposed to just being a magic number made up. Okay. But it's ultimately kind of a bringing back of what was originally destroyed and turned off.
These tokens, this is like an unburning, right? Correct. So I was trying to describe this to somebody. They once existed because of inflation on EOS, and they decide at the same time as the BPs on EOS decided to turn down inflation, so it no longer funded this because they didn't have a good way to distribute the funds, because they were quite literally worried that the largest stakeholders would just vote tokens for themselves, which we haven't seen in Telos works yet, but it's a real risk. We've seen that in a number of chains, right? We saw Uniswap did that, right, to a big way. Basically, they voted a lot of tokens to a party to, for education purposes or whatever. But basically, that just happened to be the party who was running Uniswap. So these tokens were actually made through inflation during that time. Later on, when they decided to remove the inflation, they also removed the backlog of tokens because they didn't have a way to distribute it. They didn't build that. There were concerns that people would just vote themselves rich. So they burned those tokens first in February of 2020, and then a year later, I think, a second burn.
It was May of 2019, and then again in February of 2020.
Oh, okay, that's right.
I kind of feel like it was 2, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of a big deal because they were 2 within a year of each other, and yeah.
So now the rationale is they're unburning those or bringing those back out for this usage. And to be honest, I thought that the burning was really stupid. It burned it just simply destroyed millions of dollars worth of value, and there was no positive impact.
There was no potential path forward. It was absolute stalemate, and obviously resulted for the next 3 to 4 years of just stagnation. So, I mean, ultimately, nobody wanted to see millions of dollars worth of good that could come from it. But because the community just couldn't come to any consensus and constantly was scared of the wrong thing happening, that was the only outcome. Turn it off and get rid of the honeypot to alleviate, I'm taking my ball and going home.
Yeah. So that's part of the rationale. There, you could say that these are tokens that are being printed out of nowhere. You could also say they're being unburned from that had previously existed. I think that's ultimately up to your own personal viewpoint.
Well, it's not. There's no such thing as unburning.
Okay. Yeah,
there's minting new tokens, and that's what happened. And the other thing is, you mentioned a honeypot, Michael. This creates some. I mean, at least the previous honeypot was controlled by the block producers. This honeypot is controlled by 3 people on an Msig.
I still disagree that it's not controlled by the block producers. We had that conversation. We can talk about it now. The block producers own the owner key to that account, and there is a 7-day delay for those 3 people that have access to those funds. So the block producers still have immediate effective control, 15 of 21, to do anything as soon as any decision was made, an action approved and executed. There's a 7-day delay. Yep. So it's not that 3 people just have unadulterated access and the block producers don't anymore. Well, they do still have that same level.
So on a technical note, we were talking about the permission system before for multi-sigs, for Msigs. And this is set up so there's 3 accounts that may sign, and any 2 of those accounts signing plus a time period of 7 days will unlock the transaction to happen. So that is the requirement to pass something. 2 out of 3.
It has actually been submitted to be changed.
Oh, great. Well, let's let Chris respond, and then let's hear how it's changed.
Yeah, that change hasn't happened yet. But so the concern, the 7 days, I understand that's useful. It's very useful. The problem with the 7 days is that it requires 15 of 21 block producers to do anything during those 7 days. And what I pointed out earlier is you only actually need 7 block producers to prevent that 7 days from actually anything ever happening to stop the transaction. And so that's not that many. Controlling 7 BPs is a lot easier than controlling 15. And now I think it's worth pointing out one of the individuals who's on that 3-person Msig is a gentleman named Tony. And Tony, I believe, probably sells you some votes, Michael, on EOS. And Tony is the guy who controls the BitThumb proxy out of Korea. So he's got 45 million EOS under his control, and he uses that to sell to various block producers, because that's how it works on EOS. He takes a cut and gives the rest to BitThumb for their token holders. That 45 million EOS gives a single individual a lot of ability to negotiate BPs. And if he really wanted to, could probably ensure that there's 7 there who would like to do what he would want. I'm only pointing this out because it's possible. I'm not saying Tony's a bad guy. I'm not saying he's going to do it. I'm saying he could do it. We've left the door open for someone to be able to do that.
That is a separate issue to discuss, because if you're saying that the 15 of 21, or call it the 7 of 21, is compromised, it doesn't matter about the fund directly. The issue is that you don't have the trust in the original 15 of 21 to begin with, because of the same person having that control over it. If there was no funds and he just wanted to make the magic 15 sock puppets do whatever he wanted, then ultimately this whole fund and structure wouldn't even be needed. So that's why I say is I somewhat decoupled the 2 of them, is that I know that you say he has control of the VPs and can manipulate it, but even without this fund, that's the state of the chain naturally as it is today.
So what I would say to you is it's harder for him to get control of 15 than it is for control of 7. And you were one of the 15, Michael, that I do trust. And yet you still voted in favor of this. So it's easier for him to, now that the 68 million tokens existed, that required 15. That's harder for him to orchestrate.
Correct, but that's an assumption.
7 is very easy for him to orchestrate.
That's an assumption that I'm voting that way because of him. And that's part of my frustration. Well, that's an assumption, is that
but you've created the risk now, though. Like, now that risk exists. That risk did not exist to this severity because 15 is harder to create. 7 is easier for him to control than 15. And now that's a possibility that did not exist until you passed this.
So, Michael, can you go ahead and explain how it's changed since as well, or what the changes are that you suggested?
So one of the big hangups on it was that the 2 of 3 was, and maybe even the particular individuals that they were being, was a concern for the community. And so in response, they have immediately kicked out, and all 3 have approved the Msig, but it's on a 7-day delay to update the permissions to be able to include 4 other BPs. EOS, Big One, Hashfin, a couple other BPs. Ataclad, there you go. So, like I say, I mean, it's not an ivory tower closed wall. I know that everybody was upset that it didn't have that at the beginning. But one of the reasons that we were okay approving it is that I had many, many hours of discussions with both Eve and Tony, because I've had many conversations with Tony over the years. I've met him in person. I've talked to him. I know him more than probably many others do. So that's why EOS USA has a little bit more ability to instill some trust in the fact that we want to see something happen. We watched what this chain has done 5 years ago and grind to a stalemate. We sat around for 4 years waiting on, man, this sucks. This shouldn't happen this way, but it is. And it's not going to change. It's not magically going to change. I know everybody has ideals, but okay, so we adapted a different strategy. Is that fine? We'll play the game. We're in a position where we can offer the rewards to the voters and still be able to maintain. Because if you think about it, you talk about buying votes, but that's because EOS started first and never had any mechanism to reward engagement for voters. Telos, sure enough, threw it in there. Wax, sure enough, threw it in there. Proton, all of them have since thrown in voter engagement rewards, just built in at the protocol level because of the lessons learned. And yeah, they don't have as much of an issue. EOS still doesn't particularly have that. I think the yield and all that's supposed to help address that, but that's what kind of led to the whole vote buying aspect of it. Is token holders are just looking for ROI if they're an exchange or if they're Douglas Horn. It doesn't matter, right? But EOS didn't have that mechanism, so that's how we got to where we are. But in relation to the Msig, we trust that process a little more than others, I think. And we're also much more aggressively trying to see shit change. I knew that wasn't going to be the final Msig structure because, fine, put more people on it. But we tried this 4 years ago and failed miserably, and we ended up just burning the tokens, and EOS slid into a tailspin for 4 years. Now you've got the ENF. Now you've got coders that are paying attention. Now you've got the coalition. You got Dougie Doug that's talking to all the chains. I mean, shit, we didn't do that for years, right? Yeah.
So are you guys looking at other kind of networks as inspiration for that, or are changes actually being made, or can you dive into that?
There are a lot of initiatives. I'm not in all the different blue papers and the yield plus and the whatever. I'm kind of the hamster in the wheel type of thing. But yes, I do think a lot of these mechanisms, because you will not change the status quo unless you provide them a mechanism for ROI for their tokens. The only mechanism they have right now is the process that we're not particularly thrilled of. So
there's a few of us definitely working on trying to add a way to do exactly what Michael's talking about, and that's having the network pay for voters to vote, not block producers, right? So the idea that the moral hazard that exists now is that a token holder is going to sell their vote to a BP. they're doing that for the return, not for the selection of the best block producer possible. And that's a moral hazard.
I can speak on this personally as being somebody in that role. It's not just about ROI. I can personally tell you is that, believe it or not, they do actually care about the integrity of the network and even understand that it does take operational budgets to do things. So they're not just the big bad buying votes. I don't care who it is, who will give me the most money. I can attest. There's more.
Regardless of buying votes or not, too, I think another difference is that EOS has vote decay. So you're actually, in addition to rewarding voters with actual income or more money, is that you're incentivizing them by saying, well, your vote doesn't matter anymore if you don't vote within a certain amount of time. So you better get in there and vote again, right?
But for the record, I'm not the biggest fan of that having been deprecated on Telos, because there's votes that vote for people 5 years ago that don't actively tell you they don't care about the chain anymore, yet their votes are still static there. Proxies were killed to try to alleviate some of the voter apathy. I mean, it's a great idea to pay them for it. People don't care. They just want their ROI for their tokens, and it's become an expected ROI framework at this point.
Well, I think there's a spectrum, right? Some people will vote purely for who's best at running the chain, and who has the best, who agrees with them the most, because they have their investment is so much more if EOS can grow or if Telos can grow than anything else. Others are there simply for yield, and if something were to change, or they would be able to get more yield elsewhere, they could leave the whole ecosystem, right? And then there's people at various points in between that. There's also a big cultural element, I think, and that brings me to sort of a question I have, which is, why did this happen without running the possibility of it by the users first? So on Telos, we do have this voting, and one of the things that I thought was the hardest and most important thing to get together was the culture. It's very hard to build a culture, and they tend to self-propagate if you can build a good one. And so with our amends or worker proposals or anything like that, I always recommend, this is what I've modeled, and this is what I suggest others do. People are encouraged to go out, socialize what they're talking about, share their proposal, publish something, talk to people about it, and then once they've done that, get feedback and bring it in, and then do the final Msig or proposal or whatever it may be, right? That's a process that lets people feel heard. It lets the chain benefit from the mind, the hive mind. It lets people talk about it, and whether, ideally things change if they need to change, but even if things don't change, at least people feel like they've had their chance to comment. Sometimes you come up with a proposal that most people like, and they don't need to change anything, but at least they know it's coming and they understand the parameters. And to me, whether or not you agree or disagree with the creation of the tokens or the recreation of the tokens, that socialization didn't happen, and it came as a surprise, and people didn't have a chance to discuss it. Now that they're discussing it, yes, they're making some changes, but wouldn't it have been a better process for the community to discuss these things before putting the Msig through?
Sure.
What do you guys think about that?
It absolutely didn't go down as smooth as it possibly could. I mean, no, you'd always love for it to be collaborated amongst all the people that felt like they should have their voice heard and going down that path. What I will say is that we tried that 5 years ago, and it descended into an absolute piss pool of just nobody could ever come to halfway of an agreement. And you saw what the final agreement that was decided on: just burn them. I can also tell you, having been involved with some of the public conversations, hence the way this went down, there can be some constructive conversation. But I don't know how many times, I had to say, assumptions and all of this. I'm here to explain to you, which was never even asked, why we chose to support this. And you're right, it didn't go down great. We're looking to see it better. But we also knew a 2 of 3 Msig, no, that's not what the final outcome's going to be. But shit, let's get something going. we're coming in hot like a fajita on a lot of different projects, saying, look, this analysis paralysis drags every chain down. I mean, coming to governance consensus on shit that it's a dumpster fire, it's broken, I mean, security stuff, no problem, right? But everybody's got their own opinions, and then the trolls in the Telegram channels just drag it into whatever. We have no effective mechanism on EOS. There is a little bit of one, I think the voting referendum, maybe Decide or whatever, that has that ability to even collect in an effective manner the voice of the community.
I would like to at least comment on this a little bit about the why, the timing, and everything from my understanding. So my understanding on the timing and why this wasn't brought up to the community is because at Token 2049, there was an important dinner with many potential VCs who would become LPs in this fund. And they wanted to tell everybody, hey, guess what? Look what we did. We've minted all these tokens. We've come together. You should now join and pile in your money so we can make this a big fund. That was the reason for the sneak attack. Not a sneak attack, whatever.
That was the reason for the shortened time frame.
The shortened time frame, which include no due notice to the community, right? So, but what happened?
The entire community. I disagree. Correct. That I was notified of it. That may be in a conversation between the two of us, but a different point to discuss.
And token holders vote for you, and then did you notify the token holders of what you were going to do, so they had a chance to weigh in?
The majority of my token holders, yes.
Well, Brox Pierce, we had 9 million tokens voted towards you. I didn't hear about it. So
I know you're a minority voter. I mean, that's where a lot of projects are here.
If that's how you feel about token holders that control 9 million tokens as being minority, that's fine. That's totally fine. You just call me a minority. You just said minority.
That's when you look at the vote weight that puts me into my position, mathematically, you're a minority vote holder. So I can't represent everybody
7%.
That's saying yes and no. I went to my largest vote holders and asked them. And whenever each one of my other supporters reached out, either via Twitter flame or a Telegram, WTF are you doing? It was not a pleasant experience, for the record. But I was happy to explain and have this conversation of, look, your voice was trusted in me. I understand you may not quite understand it, but I will happily explain why we chose to support this. But nobody ever really asked that. So don't get upset if I say you're a minority vote holder, because, as you saw, when you unvoted us, technically, the majority of my voters were still supporting us, but I do still respect all of the voting supporters. I'm one of probably the few people that did reach out to every single one of my proxies and say, hey, why, man? I mean, number one, you could have asked. Number two, this is why I feel
it's a two-way street, though. That idea of you could have asked goes both ways.
I don't have any effective mechanism a lot of the tokens, to go out and talk to every single one of my token holders.
I understand that, but
let me ask you this.
How many token holders are you paying for?
What dictates this? The number of people that have tokens or the number of tokens? In DPoS, it's the number of tokens.
Right.
And we're an elective representative of those tokens.
Yep.
So when it ultimately comes down to it, I have to weigh my odds and say,
that you mostly pay for.
Okay. That's the game y'all put us in. I waited for 5 years for everybody to fix it. Nobody fixed it.
Yeah.
Well, the game's not over, and we have lots of time still. So I'm not, Michael. I like you, so I know I apologize if I sounded offensive when I said about the minority. I didn't mean any offense towards that. And it's the situation. We're stuck in this situation is really the problem. It's the game, right? It's not the players, it's the game. So, but what should have happened, in my view, when we talk about the notice period and what happened. So the Token 2049 dinner happened. This Msig didn't get passed. That to me is there was an opportunity then to back up. Okay, the community found out. Obviously, not too many people were pleased. There was an opportunity that was not taken to cancel that Msig and then allow a week just to hear people out. They could have included that 4 to 7 in the first, right? That could have happened. There could have been a chance, and I think this is a calculated mistake that Eve and the ENF have made here. They could have backed off just a touch, and it wouldn't have slowed things down. It still would have happened. You know that. It still would have went through. But at least there would have been this semblance of the community's voice mattered. And I think that was a mistake because there was a chance to hear people out, to change that Msig. And then maybe we talk about 68 million. Can we put gates on that? Milestones? Like, is there more to this? Where are the profits going to go from this LP? Like, there is more questions we could probably look to seek answers to. But it's not going to stop it. I just think it was and the thing with DPoS and tokens matter. we should have a chance to know what we're voting for. So the idea, like really what should have happened, especially minting new tokens is a tax on every current existing token holder because it's diluting their stake. So that's like, it's not just fixing a bug fix. It's not just changing something about a grant program. It's minting new tokens. This is diluting all of our asset value. And that is something we should have a chance to weigh in on, I think. And the way you do that is through voting. And the way you do that is by knowing what's happening and knowing which BP supported or not. Then we vote accordingly. That's the process. It didn't get followed. It was a lost opportunity. And hopefully we'll learn from it and go forward.
Yeah, we do are bumping up on the edge of our time here. So, but I did kind of just want to have that as our final thoughts. Like, what do we think? How do we think it could be approached differently in the future? And Chris, I mean, you summed it up pretty well. Any final thoughts from your side, Michael?
Well, like I say, the way we looked at it, and ultimately it did play out that way. So if it was optics the greatest, maybe not, but ultimately we're trying to get shit done. I mean, all these chains are destroying us in market cap because they have war chest and they have money. And they're able to go and knock on somebody's door and be like, look how crappy this Solana chain is, but you want to run it, right? So I'm excited to see that. We've seen EOS over the last year break away, form an ENF, whether you like the decisions or the people or whatever. I mean, it's progress forward. I've described it as righting of the ship. I mean, 5 years, we all just tried everything we possibly could. And so what EOS USA has done is tried to position ourselves to be more relevant, be a trusted person, is that you at least on those 15 signatures, there was one of them that you trusted more than probably some of the others. That's what we're trying to do. I will explain to you why. We may not always agree. Again, I mean, I don't disagree. We can do it better. But just like we saw is that I didn't feel like that group of people that we were scared, damn, it's really 2 of 3, wouldn't be open to, dude, the whole community is about to, light this place on fire and torch it. We need to do something, to help push it forward and remediate it. So
sure.
I look at it as it still worked out in the way that we potentially saw it working out. I'm not thrilled that the community's pissed off about it, but I'll be honest with you. I saw how it went down 5 years ago, and I saw how it's transpired since. Man, I'm kind of glad we got shit done. We'll figure it out and pick up the pieces.
We're almost kind of bordering on a discussion here between centralization and decentralization, right? Because the problem in the past was too much decentralization caused a lack of action. But here, what I'm seeing now is it sounds like the community is feeling like the decision is being made for them, that decentralization just doesn't work, and we need to have a centralized entity taking care of these things, or else, right? So I wonder kind of what your guys' thoughts are on that, and what the benefits would be to have, because isn't that part of kind of what the EOS Foundation is for, right? To kind of,
that similar on Telos would be like the Telos Foundation and the TCDs. And, a lot of the structure that Telos actually built was to try to replicate what EOS never actually had, and is now starting to get back with the ENF, with the agreements and the LEAP and all of that. So ultimately, it's EOS catching back up to what a lot of people learned from their mistakes. And the way we do things over on Telos, or even I look at Wax. Why is Wax succeeding where they're at? I can personally tell you, they're a pretty ivory tower. They've got their war chest, they've got their decisions, but they're making deals with Tops and the wrestling people and whoever else. And at this game and stage, the BPs and decentralized governance don't get that. There's not even a legal entity to be able to do that, right? It's a very interesting world that we're trying to bridge here. And EOS was always left in the dust. We couldn't agree on anything, and we had no structure, no software support, no nothing, right? B1 kind of left us out to dry.
So I have a different view on this idea that EOS was too decentralized at the beginning. I think EOS was too centralized at the beginning because Block 1 had too big of a voice and too much stake and too much ability to move BPs around with their amount of voting power. And so it wasn't that we were too decentralized. It's that they were too much of a behemoth. Yeah, but they still controlled the narrative, and everyone looked to Dan and Brendan and B1 and changed their decisions accordingly, and they didn't want to go against B1. So there was this central authority that people deferred to. I think since they've sort of been pushed, now we're more decentralized, but now we've added a very centralized entity who didn't seem to be overly willing to listen to the community. Again, tactical mistake. Hopefully they don't do it again and we learn from that. But we run the risk of trading, again, it's going to sound bad, but we've traded one central dictator for another. And in the end, if you have a benevolent dictator, that's great, no problem. And it sounds bad, but it's the moral hazard. It's like when I mentioned Tony, right? It's not that I think Tony's a bad guy. It's that you don't want to create opportunity where there's where power can corrupt. And we saw what happened to SBF. We saw what happened to Do Kwon. There's nothing like, no one is perfect. And so when we leave too much to a single individual or a small group of individuals, it's an unnecessary risk that we're voluntarily taking. And that is where I'm coming from. I think everyone's great. I think they're doing a great job. I like what Eve is doing. Tony's probably a wonderful guy. I mean, it's not that. It's that you create situations that you shouldn't create, especially with your eyes wide open. You know better.
So do you support it in the current structure right now with the updated
7 out of 7? It's gone to 4 out of 7 once it passes. That Msig is better. Yes, it's slightly improved. I think I prefer 5 out of 7, to be honest. I think 4 is still a little low. And I still personally, working for Helios as a VC, I have a lot of questions about how to carry. I think there's other ways we could have lured in potential LPs by profit sharing. Why does the ENF side, the EOS side of that LP just take less profit? And then to me, there's other ways you could have carried in VCs versus saying we need to have this huge amount to bring them in. I'm curious about how the profits are going to be spent. I'm curious who's actually going to control this GP, who are the partners, how does governance work there, who's making decisions, we don't know any of those details yet. So just to go out and then why 68 million, it could have, just because it's a cute number that matched what we previously burned. That's the only reason. It could have been 100 million. It could have been 5 million. It could have been using smart contracts.
Yeah,
there's an idea.
That.
Why not do gated release? Like why not have milestones with arbiters like the BTs to release more? Why 68?
My argument back to that is that 68 million, the token holders up to the point, I mean, there's been arguments that said they should have never been burned in the first place. Mm-hmm. The token holders did not authorize the burning of the 68 million to begin with. That ripped away from the fund that they were always originally intended for. So, I mean, to say that it's not the will of the token holders to remint the coins or whatever, technically it wasn't the will of the token holders to burn them in the first place. We're just undoing the wrong that was done in the first place in that aspect. Does that make sense?
But why not? Talk about it first.
Right.
So I disagree that the communications could definitely have been better.
Both of these networks, Telos as well, we're at a point now where our communities are so much larger than they were, and it maybe made sense to, trust small groups of people at first, but now we're missing out on vital possibilities, right? Like, and all these great questions that Chris has had, for example, like, what are the implications of this for these people that maybe we didn't think about, and it's. When as your network expands, it feels like you kind of have to expand those like forum structures, right? So you don't miss out on these kinds of ideas.
It's hard to want to give up power, even maybe especially when you think you're using it very well and very much for the community. For example, we face the same problem with Telos because initially the board that was making up, the Telos Foundation was elected, but it was only electable by people who had taken part and done work in our launch. During that time we had minted a special token called the TF token, and that let us vote in these things. And part of that was a way of saying, hey, honestly,
so
you say,
launched in a controlled manner and then eventually grew into an aspect, listened to the voice of the community and adapted the permission structure accordingly.
Exactly. You got brought in.
Very similar.
Absolutely. And that's why, and really kind of material to this call, that's brought Chris and Erica into the Telos board and others like Uma and Betty who we're not insiders.
But I was around during that, and that didn't come up as by the way, guys, we should probably do this. I think it got brought to light because somebody was like, what the hell? How does this happen? That's messed up. That's not going to work, guys. Oh, you're right. It's legacy. We should fix that. So you got going, you got started. It wasn't the ideal solution, but then you adapted, and it didn't even really get changed until it got brought up in the public discourse of, we should probably could do this better. And so that's along the same lines of kind of how we look at it, is that let's move, let's shake.
Right. But EOS has had, 4.5 years now to grow. Like when does the culture or the process become hey, let's mention this. Let's get feedback as our first step before we do anything.
Sure.
I think it did happen. I think it was just
2022
over
has been
such a long
spent.
period that people didn't realize that what was happening, because it was it was not a fast process, because we also had
2022 has been
technical
a year of EOS learning all sorts of new things and figuring things out. I mean, a lot of the lessons that all the other chains got to learn from EOS is now having to catch up. And yes, I think forever this will be referenceable as hey, you guys ain't going to do that shit again, right? Just like we always reference, hey, you don't have two admins named Joe running the same servers, do you? So, I mean, lessons learned and progress forward. So constructive conversations are had. I mean, hell, even, some of the recommended changes have been pushed forward and will continue to be negotiated and information more publicly available. But like I say,
So do you feel
supported?
Listening to you, so going into this, I thought, okay, well, they just don't have the culture of discussing this with the community and getting feedback before acting. That was my assumption going into this. Michael, after listening to you talk about it a bit, I started to question whether maybe it was actually calculated to not ask, that it's easier to ask for forgiveness and permission. So I don't have any knowledge about that, but what do you know?
Like I say, I mean, so it wasn't just this closed decision and then, decisions being made and votes being thrown directive to put people in place. So, I mean, there was an open collaboration. It was not with the entire community. But like I tried to say is that I know y'all may not have been completely aware of it, but I had hours of phone calls because I'm not a VC person. So I don't really get it, but explain it to me. How am I going to support this? Oh, okay. I do see, and the deciding factor on the Msig is at least we have a plan B, the owner key, and then we'll see where it goes forward.
I want to say one thing that's really important here. I just got to say this because this is really important. When we're talking to you're saying that conversations happen with token holders before. So there was a conversation with people that are voting for you, Michael, to keep you there. There was a conversation. True, very true. Except, really important fact, right now to be a number one BP on EOS, you need 161 million tokens voting for you. That is like 15%, 16% of the total token supply. Yeah. There are so many tokens not voting.
You have to have about 120 million.
Did any of those other tokens who aren't voting currently, they didn't have a chance. That's my point. There's a lot of other tokens that might have voted had they known about what was happening. They never got a chance to find out.
I mean, if they're not voting for their block producers to have their voice represented, I am sorry if your voice didn't get accurately represented by the block producers that are currently voted in with the current token weight. I mean, I understand on a societal level where you're coming from, but DPoS is built off of tokens, the token weight, what you do with your tokens. And we look at block producers as an elected representative. I can't represent every single one of my voters, every single one of my tokens' voice. Because just like my senator here in the States, he got yeses and nos. So ultimately the majority wins. But it's all
in the news. It's all reported in the, what's up for debate and what's up for that comes out long in advance. Can I ask how, along the lines with Chris's question, how did you decide who to contact with this, and how did you contact them, and how did you decide who not to contact? Right. So you opened up.
Works in general.
I actually have constant working relationships with both of them, just on regular levels, with being involved with the ENF, being involved with Tony from a support aspect. And like I say, I not to go into too many more personal details, but it's even scopes bigger than that. So again, that's why personally, if you ask EOS USA, Michael, why was he able to support that? We do have a little bit different aspect of the thing than most other people in the world. So, I mean, does that answer part of the question? Or
well, I just think about what I would do in the same, and what my pattern is. And I'm not trying to say one's better or worse than the other, but my pattern tends to be, as much as I can, unless there's some secret that we can't because it's an exchange but there's very few of those anymore that I even know about. I'm always, let's ask.
It's not particularly, that wasn't my information to distribute. So remember, I mean, I don't have just free reign to go and run to Chris and be like, hey, this is what's being presented. So, I mean, a lot of that is
why not?
Outside. It's not my content.
Why don't you do? Was it deemed something that was so in the Antelope Coalition meetings? We had the one today. We talk about, are we going to record these or not? And I'm always, let's err on the side of transparency. And if there's something we can't because somebody's going to grab all these names, or because we just can't let this out until it's done, like the branding, then we don't record those sections. But I don't know. I guess I don't understand the thinking. So what I would do is say, okay, well, let's immediately get as much as we can out to the community.
So how do you collect that consensus? Let me ask you that. This is back to
Will you ask not to?
How do you collect? No. How do you collect that consensus? There's no mechanism for me to go out. The only mechanism we have in DPoS is to drop an Msig and signal support or really abstinent from a cause. So, like I say, I mean, in the whole grand scope of things, it wasn't like we were all like, shh, don't tell anybody. Of course, there were going to be press releases about it. And of course, there was going to be discussion and whatnot about it. But what the hang up is the Msig hit before the notification went out. Where a lot of us differ is that the Msig is the only mechanism anybody has of effectively voicing support or not. So we support it in its limited scope as it is right now. You know what? Did you see me go out and promote it? Nope, not my thing. I'm just voicing.
I'd almost rather, but if you promoted it, people would have known about it, right? I mean,
I'm not the ENF. I'm not the ENV. I'm just a block producer. It's not my place to take it and go with it. I did have conversations about this is going to have notifications and everything, right? Yes, we're going to release this article and provide the details and all of this and issue the Msig at the exact same time. That's how on-chain block producers, we don't have any other mechanism. Telos has some on-chain, what do y'all call that? The referendum? Where token holders can
amend. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be on-chain. You could, you have Telegram, you have.
So you want me to go to Telegram to have this conversation? That's my whole point, is that we tried that. I can tell you, ain't no better than it was 5 years ago. It's nothing but trolls, and how many people got called stupid and you're an idiot and I'm gonna ban you.
It was a great time, Michael. We were both getting shit on hard. Well,
that's what I was about to say.
Maybe a little more harder than you, but.
Yeah, I mean, we were trying, and that's what I kept saying. I'm here to have a constructive conversation. I would love to. I have some strong points behind where I came from. Chris has very valid points. And then I get told I'm stupid because I just had some drinks with Tony and I trust him. Fuck you. Oh, sorry.
You're definitely not stupid. I think it's the moral hazard. No, I don't know. I would never say that. And in the end, I think what should have been said, is that you've introduced risk, Michael. Right. And I think that you can agree there is some risk, but it's calculated and you're willing to take it because you wanted to move forward.
Felt a little more comfortable than others, and I know that nobody would see that. I mean, I can't even divulge all of it just because I shouldn't have to. But as an elected representative, you're leaning on me and trusting me. And that's why everybody's like, holy shit, how did you support this? But nobody ever asked me truly why. Then we started, I came into that channel and I provoked the conversation lightly because I knew I was walking into a shitstorm. But I came in there to at least start having this conversation and be a face to be like, this is why we supported it. I know you may not agree. It may not have been the perfect decisions, but this is why.
And what happened there too, for make it interesting, now, right? Helios moved a vote. We moved 10 million, well, Brock's proxy, we moved 10 million EOS to pull Michael from the top because he had signaled support. So we used DPoS. That means you see what they support. So. We don't agree with their decision. We pulled his vote. We put in, which we are not proud of, but we put in trust staking, which is Binance's sock puppet, into the 21st spot. So we knowingly put in a BP controlled, and I mean, not proud.
You knowingly put in a BP
we knew they wouldn't vote.
Publicly abstains from all governance.
Exactly. So we tried to slow it. We tried to slow it down.
But you were playing a political game as well. And guess what? We were the pawn. That really made me mad too.
You were just in the 21st
All I
spot.
got was hate mail.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, not for
Not
me.
from
I mean,
you.
it
Not
was
from you.
just because you were the 21st spot, and we could, and that's what we could do. That's all we could do. We only had 10 million tokens. But here's one thing I'll say to close up before I'm done here: there are a lot of tokens on the sideline, and we have heard from a lot of people as being a bit more public about this. I've been very outspoken about this because I disagree with the process, not necessarily with what actually happened. It was the process and the execution that really started to raise white flags. So we're not done. This story is not over. There should be a great opportunity for a second interview because we are working on a way to introduce a smart proxy that will introduce a way to pull 0.25%, the BPay side of what's paying block producers. So now that spread between 22nd and 21st will disappear, and we're going to pull 0.25%, and the network can pay for voters to then vote for BPs that the community will select. And that's something you've mentioned that we kind of needed that. Other chains have done this network support of tokens. So, and I don't think you're necessarily against it. So that's good. So this is coming, and we're going to have an open conversation. We're going to release a white paper, and there's some very large whales who are not participating that I think will start to, and this will make it kind of exciting. And it's optimistic. Like, to me, this is this can end in it's a good news story. A little bumpy right here, but I think the where we get to in the future, in the horizon, the sunset, it's still going to be a beautiful place, and it's going to be hopefully beautiful for all these Antelope chains, Telos, EOS, all of us, right? Rising tide.
And that's why we were willing to go a little cowboy and try to get shit going.
All right.
Is that gonna be my meeting? Y'all used the last one with this, That's like,
So I would say, to your credit, Michael, you're here talking about it, right? You're doing
that
this.
goes back to this is a whole nother conversation. And I had this, Edgar and I from Costa Rica had long conversations about I'm just contributing to the game. And I'm like, look, we waited on the game to change and it didn't. I'm taking a different approach. Point is that we were able to fill a slot. And hey, guess what? They're not just milking us dry over it. It's not as bad as people might think it is. But we were able to put another trusted brand in a spot. Yes, we became a pawn, but maybe even more so because, like Javier said, we at least can talk to you. You're the only one that we feel like they're available. They're just not in the communities that we're in, man. I mean, I can tell you now, having ascended into this block producer role and the coordination, I'll be honest with you, out of all the chains that we work with, the EOS block producers and their coordination, while it may not be in Telegram and it may not be open with everybody, it is actually much more streamlined and coordinated because there's coordination. There's not 8,000 people. Like this upgrade with Leap, we're going through it on all the other chains, and not a single one of them is anywhere clean and concise like that was. And then you look back and go, hell, may not like that they're doing, these things, but they're in communication. They're, they do care about the network. Anyway,
centralization has its benefits.
Yeah, but yeah, this is a good week to show that it has its negatives as well. But so the 15, and you also voted for this, right? But even though I think you weren't in the top 21
we got
at the
back
time,
in, but yeah,
so
we
there's
were
at least
on back and forth.
Yeah, that voted for it, but also never exposed it to the community, right? So that's a bit, to me, that's a failure.
It's not my content to be able to release. I did have conversations. Hold on, I did have conversations to try to assure this is going to be announced in some way, right? We're not just going to do it. Yes, there's going to be a Medium article. Yes, there's some reason and some scheduling behind it. Yes, I do agree. Maybe it didn't go down as smooth as it possibly could. But the fact that the Msig and the article announcing it came out at the same time, to me, isn't as bad as a lot of people interpret it, because I look at it as a different mechanism. We don't have any way of doing that. Therefore, that was the on-chain signaling. But it also happened to be the action to do it. And that's why I say I'm all about a forum or some other way to signal without actually having to be, we do this all the time, is that we've got to do a fake Msig to get everybody to agree that, hey, we're going to do a real Msig and you do support it, right? There's no mechanism for that and hasn't been. We tried it, but it failed. So
Well, there's no on-chain mechanism. So I look at it
Telegram
like,
sucks.
yeah, no, and Discord, there's a lot of terribly fractionated things. It's imperfect, and especially with EOS, much more is happening in other languages than on Telos. All those things, but you being asked to I feel that any BP that's being asked to vote for something, short of a really excellent reason why it should be some kind of closed door session, and a really compelling reason, don't you feel that you're saying you feel like it's not your news to share, and yet you're voting as a part of an executive committee
signaling?
And so I think it is. I would say I think it is your news to share, and anyone who has that
Once it's been released into the public, absolutely. That's whenever I started having my discussions with everybody. It just happened to come 3 days later after getting nothing but waking up to hate mail every morning, and me going out and caring. Chris didn't send me hate mail. I went and picked that fight in the channel because he was one of the last few that I hadn't had to. Oh, I got flamed on Twitter. I got, I got told.
But that's not what's happening here.
I was collateral damage because Gray Mask got voted out. And I'm like, you suck, man.
You voted for it right away, right? Could you
Because obviously, as I mentioned, I had already been in touch and had I was prepared to signal we support it. You're right. I was one of the first ones. I knew it was coming. I was aware of all the details. I was comfortable. I wasn't blindsided. I understand the community felt blindsided. But when people ask me, how could you do that? Here's the reason why. Do I wish it went down a little differently? Of course now I do.
Would you do it different next time?
I still stand behind it, is that I still approve the overall concept. I still trust it as a starting point.
Will you behave the same? I mean, will you have the same process, or would you say, "Well, I'm not going to vote for it until the"?
I probably would still, if the mechanisms stay the same way that they are right now, I would still do the same thing. But I'm going to say is that it's not because I'm not going to campaign to push it forward. How does anybody have any way of knowing what my official stance is? Do you want me to go post a Medium article? Because they can't get to that on the other side of the world. Do you want me to go into Telegram and get beat up by the trolls? Because that doesn't really work. Nobody pays attention to those anymore. What mechanism do you really want me to signal it with and have an effective communication? Short of
That's
going
a great
to
question.
I feel like you know what I mean?
There needs to be something, right?
Sure.
Chris, what do you think about that?
I think a BP should pick a platform that they choose to communicate and just stick with it. Whether it's your Twitter, whether it's your own Telegram, whatever you want. I think you have plenty of options. The idea that it should be communicated.
Block. That's my chosen platform.
If you can do it efficiently and you can get access as quickly as you want, but I think in all seriousness, right? There should be. I think if we go back to 2018 and of the principles that we all thought that the block producers would present themselves or carry themselves with, a lot of those principles, I think, this is again Telos EOS differences. We're seeing that is still the case in Telos. Telos is a community-run blockchain where each BP has a face and they are reachable. And there's a mechanism.
It's had its own nuances as well, for the sake of the argument. It is not.
I'm not saying it's perfect. No, I'm not saying it's perfect.
Nothing's perfect.
Surely you can agree that it is far more faced with BPs than we see with EOS. I mean, that's not an argument that I need to explain.
It's a better self-cleansing.
I mean, there's a lot of face. If you click through, if you look on blocks right now, you'll notice a ton of inflation going to BPs, and there is no link clickable for Twitter, for Telegram. They don't have a channel. There's no email. You can't find it. There's nothing there. It's actually
none of those mechanisms that the Western culture uses. They're all in WeChat channels.
The sock puppets are all in WeChat channels? Because there's a lot of sock puppets.
I think the point
You're calling them all sock puppets, and I think that's an unfair association of all of them being sock puppets. A lot of sock puppets.
We're going to be releasing some data. So there's a lot of data that has been mined over the years that is going to be.
I can tell you this: all of the operators of the nodes are communicating. I'm not doing personal KYC on every single one of them, but there's different teams that I've worked with more than a dozen different people from around the EOS, the block producer space. So, at least in the active 21. Now, in the lower ranks, sure. There's all sorts of
That's what I'm
trash
talking
related down there.
That's one of the downsides that Tony is doing. Unfortunately, it's part of the rules. It's okay.
I mean, if you want to get into it,
BPs that are sock puppet BPs.
Telos had to do some of the same thing. It wasn't sock puppets, but it was people that were simply just joining in and trying to siphon off the lower end of the rewards that they can because it was available. So what did they do? They just cut the number of standbys to try to make it a harder thing. So it's not something that's immune to any of the other chains. It's definitely something we can try to work out better, but there's so much harping on this sock puppet. People are going to latch on and suck off as much value as we allow them to. Yes, we can change it, but even Telos with its monumental flat pay and inverted weighting and no decay and all of this, still we looked at it and went, shit, there's like 10 people that don't ever run a node, don't even care. They're just siphoning off of it. And you got to clean them out. So, it's not.
That's to happen, though.
No, I'm not saying it's unique, but it's a problem, and there's a solution. And one of it is to start to have enforced faces and try to encourage dialogue and find out the people who don't talk and don't communicate. That's a step towards the right direction.
I saw an argument on that is that if all active 21 of your block producers are KYC'd and identified, that's a security risk, because if none of them are actually truly anonymous, then in theory, you could absolutely censor and shut down the chain. You could be anonymous, active.
Just like the picture you used in, you could use your logo, like Trimbot. Trimbot we know is a person, right? Glue Dog, as much as we love that guy. I know he's a real dude. He could run a BP and hopefully no one would vote for him, but he could be there and it would be like, at least he's not KYC'd.
Hey, you should vote for him. He would definitely come and discuss it with you in the public channels. I kid. Right. But anyway, I love having these conversations. Thank y'all for letting me come on and talk about all this. I knew Chris and I would both, I feel, have valid points. We squeezed them in amongst all the hate. Glue Dog, I'm a ban your ass. So.
Well, this is a different forum, and I hope you guys know that you're not going to get any of that here. And this is a chance to discuss it without all the trolls, and you can accept me. You can put your own. Thanks so much, guys. This has been great having you. I know that the conversation will continue, but hopefully good things come out of it, and I guess we'll just keep our eye on how this grows.
Hey, Chris, can I get the vote back?
So much.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we're gonna. Well, it depends. It's part of that smart proxy if you got to sign up.
Let's check.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. And thank you, Michael.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
See ya.
Bye.
All right. So now it is time for Nathaniel to give us this week's market news and non-financial advice in 60 seconds or less. All right. Nathaniel, are you ready?
I'm ready.
3, 2, 1, go.
Most major tokens were down as much as 30% this week. Many small tokens were down as much as 70% this week. Solana was down 70%, down to 14. Aptos down 44 to $4. ApeCoin down 40% to $3. Near down 40% to $1.93. ETH down 22% to 1,200. Bitcoin down 22% to 16,000. Telos saw negative 23% over the last 7 days. We actually had a big jump to 23, and then a very strong resilience at 16. The dollar tethers seem to maintain their prices, indicating that there's stability in the markets. And Trust Wallet is actually our winner this week with 100% up to $2.36. Overall, it was a terrible red week for crypto, and we all know why.
Well, thank you, Nathaniel. Awesome.
All right.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today's episode. So if you want to learn more about Web3 and all the work that we're doing, check us out wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe for this video, and hit the notification icon so we can see you guys next time. Thanks.